Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's online talk, which will be starting shortly at 3 p.m. For those of you who are here early, thank you for waiting patiently. We would like to share with you a short video from the firm before we start.
I founded the firm in September 1985 with the vision of seeking truth and justice for our clients and not just winning their cases. Over the years, the team has achieved many significant milestones. We are today recognized by the Legal 500, Asia Law Profiles, and Asian Legal Business as a recommended firm in various practice areas. While we have embraced technology to make our services efficient and responsive, we continue to grow on the bedrock of meticulous preparation and hard work, for which there is really no substitute. As legal practice becomes increasingly international, we keep ourselves ahead of the curve with our relationships with lawyers from around the world. Our firm is a founding member of the League of Lawyers, a growing international network of law firms in 20 Asian and European countries.
We believe in partnering with our clients to protect and grow their business. We achieve this by holding firm to our values of integrity and justice, while giving our best to deliver effective and efficient solutions. Instead of just legal services, we focus on developing great working relationships based on understanding and respect.
We regularly advise foreign clients, including many Chinese investors, and have a ready appreciation for different ways of doing business. In corporate matters, we offer relevant and commercial solutions, often raising issues that clients may or may not have realized before. In negotiations, we believe in facilitating win-win outcomes.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's online talk entitled Understanding Stamp Duty in Property Transactions. My name is Alyssa. I'm an associate with Ma Weng Kwai & Associates, and I will be your moderator for today's session. So before we start today's talk, let me introduce the firm and what we do. Ma Weng Kwai & Associates is a mid-sized law firm that was founded in 1985 by Datuk Ma Weng Kwai. Our able team today comprises of about 28 lawyers and a support team of 35. Datuk Ma is today a consultant with the firm following his retirement from the Court of Appeal bench in 2015. The firm continues its tradition today of working primarily with small medium enterprises or SMEs, family businesses, and also individuals. We are a full-service law firm with a corporate department, a dispute resolution department, which includes litigation, adjudication, and arbitration, a dedicated employment and industrial relations team, and a department focused on servicing the needs of individuals and families. So our practice groups indicate some of our focus areas, which are supported by talents from both our corporate and also dispute resolution teams. So today's talk is part of our MWKA online talk series. By way of background, we have been organizing monthly lunch talks at our office since 2013, some of which were also broadcasted live. But with the COVID-19 MCO, we have moved online in order to continue with our objective of sharing knowledge, raising awareness, and also encouraging networking for clients, potential clients, and also in-house counsel. But before I continue, please be reminded that this talk does not constitute legal advice. And in the event you do require specific legal advice for your matter, please contact us for complimentary legal consultation, and the details of which will be given at the end of this talk. So we have two speakers for today. Allow me to introduce Vinson Cheng. He is a senior associate practicing in the area of real property transactions. He was admitted to the bar in 2018, and he specializes in acquisitions and disposals of real property, loan documentations for financial institutions, and also tenancies and leases. His other areas of interest and practice include contract drafting, will writing, and also inheritance matters. Our second speaker for today is Azila Amiruddin. She's a paralegal in our conveyancing department. She graduated with a Bachelor of Legal Studies from the University of Technology, Mara, and she is currently pursuing her CLP. Her areas of practice include acquisitions and disposals of real property, either by individuals or corporate, loan documentations for various financiers, and also drafting various kinds of contracts. So for today, Vinson will be talking about what is stamp duty and also calculating stamp duty, while Azila will be talking about stamp duty on property investments and also joint purchases. and stamp duty exemptions and changes in 2024. We will then conclude with the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please don't forget to type it up in the Q&A chat box. And without further ado, I will now pass the floor to Vinson to start the talk.
Thank you very much, Alyssa, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our talk today, Understanding Stamp Duty on Property Transactions. So for the time being, me, Vinson, I will be covering two first talk points of the day, what is stamp duty and calculating stamp duty. Without further ado, let's look at our first talk point, what is stamp duty? So what is stamp duty? So stamp duty, as we all understand, it is an amount of tax which is levied on certain written instruments. So this means that verbal transactions like verbal agreements and things like that are not subject to stamp duty. So basically, there are two types of stamp duties. The first one being ad valorem, which means the stamp duty chargeable on the instrument is based on the value or the consideration of the instrument. And then we have another one, fixed stamp duty, which the government charges a fixed amount, say for example, 10 ringgit or 100 Malaysian ringgit on the instrument itself. So certain types of written instruments are chargeable with stamp duty, and these instruments are stated in the first schedule of the Stamp Act 1949. This means that not every written instrument is chargeable with stamp duty. Why is this stamping important? This is because an unstamped instrument is not admissible as evidence in the court unless it is stamped with the appropriate amount of stamp duty. Nonetheless, it is important to highlight to everyone that a written instrument is still valid nonetheless, even though it is not stamped. Say, for example, a contract which has been validly executed between two parties are valid instrument, but it cannot be admissible at court until it is stamped. So when do instruments need to be stamped? So here we have it. If it is executed within Malaysia, the instrument must be stamped within 30 days from its execution, or if it is executed outside of Malaysia, within 30 days after the document is first received in Malaysia. So if the parties do not stamp the documents in time, there will be some penalty imposed. Say, for example, if the instrument is stamped after 30 days, but within 3 months from the date of the instrument, there will be a penalty of 25 Malaysian ringgit or 5% of the stamp duty, whichever is higher. So let's look at some instruments which are chargeable with stamp duty when it comes to property transactions. So in property transactions, we have transfers of property, or what we more commonly known as MOT and Borang 14A. Apart from that, purchasers will also get loans to help them finance the purchase of properties. So this is also subject to stamp duty. So another example of instruments chargeable with stamp duty are tenancies and leases. So tenancy as agreement, you have to get it stamped as well in order for it to be admissible at court. So finally, we have some miscellaneous instruments, which are affidavits and statutory declarations. So these are also chargeable with stamp duty. So let's look at our second topic of the day, calculating stamp duty. So how do we calculate stamp duty? We will teach you step by step. So first of all, let's look at transfer. So for all transfers of properties in Malaysia, they are all subject to stamp duty. Of course, if it falls within certain categories, then there will be stamp duty exemption. So for transfers, we look at the consideration, which means the value of the property in the SPA, or the adjudicated value, which is adjudicated by LHDN and JPPH, Jabatan Penilaian dan Perkhidmatan Harta. So LHDN will base the stamp duty based on the higher value, whichever is higher. So let's look at how it is calculated. So firstly, we have the first tier, the first 100,000, which is chargeable with a stamp duty of 1%. The next 400,000 will be subject to a rate of 2%. The next 500,000 will be subject to 3%, and any amount in excess of the first 100 million will be subject to 4%. So let's take a look at a real-life example. So let's say we have a consideration of 1.205 million. So how do we calculate the stamp duty? So based on the table just now, the first 100,000 will be subject to 1%. So that's 1,000 there. The next 400,000 will be subject to 2%. So that's 8,000 there. And then the next 500,000 will be subject to 3%. That means 15,000. And the remaining 205,000 will be subject to 4%. So if we were to add all of this up, we would get a stamp duty of 32,200 ringgit. So this is a stamp duty which is payable to LHDN on the transfer instrument, be it a memorandum of transfer, a warrant 14A, or a deed of assignment. Next, let's look at loan and financing. So compared to the tiered rate of stamp duty for transfers, we have a more simple rate of calculation for loan and financing agreements. So it is 0.5% of the loan or financing amount. So let's take a look at another example. So we have here 868,800 ringgit. Say, for example, this is the loan amount granted by the bank. So first of all, we have to round it up to the nearest thousand, 869,000. So with 869,000, we will just multiply it with 0.5% here, and we get 4,345 ringgit being the stamp duty payable for this particular loan agreement. As for tenancies and leases, so it really depends on two factors. So firstly, we have to look at the duration of the tenancy, and also depending on the duration of the tenancy, the rate will be different as well. So if it is less than 1 year, so the stamp duty rate will be 1 ringgit for every 250 ringgit of the annual rent or any part thereof in excess of the first 2,400 ringgit. This means that the first 2,400 ringgit is exempt from stamp duty, but anything apart from the 2,400 will be subject to stamp duty. So let's have a look at another example for our tenancy. So the formula for calculating stamp duty for tenancy is, you have this here, monthly rent multiplied by 12 to get the annual rent, minus the first 2,400 ringgit, which is exempt from stamp duty, divided by 250, round it up to the nearest whole number, and multiply by the applicable rate based on the table here. So it can be 1 ringgit for duration of tenancy less than a year, 2 ringgit for tenancies between 1 to 3 years, and 4 ringgit for lease, which is 3 years and above. So say, for example, we have an example here, monthly rent of 2,100 ringgit, where the duration of tenancy is 2 years. So in this case, when we refer to the formula here and the table here, we can get the way of calculation, which is 2,100 ringgit monthly rent multiplied by 12 minus 2,400 divided by 250 ringgit times 2. So we have the times 2 here because the applicable rate for tenancies between 1 to 3 years is 2 ringgit for every 250 ringgit of the annual rent. Hence, we get a stamp duty of 184 ringgit. So this stamp duty of 184 ringgit is payable on the principal or original copy of the tenancy agreement. An additional 10 ringgit is chargeable for each additional copy of the same agreement. So this would also apply to loan agreements just now. So extra 10 ringgit is payable for each extra copy of the loan agreement. So we can also look at what we call fixed stamp duty for certain instruments. So for affidavits and statutory declarations, for example, in property transactions, the vendors and purchasers may need to have a statutory declaration signed and affirmed in front of a commissioner for oath. So statutory declarations like this are subject to a stamp duty of 10 ringgit flat stamp duty rate. Some other examples that we have, these are not necessarily related to property transactions, but we can have a look at this. So for memorandum of association of the company, it is subject to a stamp duty of 100 ringgit. This is a fixed stamp duty. And for power of attorney, it is also subject to a fixed stamp duty of 10 ringgit. So next up, we have our third and fourth top points, stamp duty on property investments and joint purchases. So I will be passing this to our second speaker of the day, my colleague Azila.
Thank you, Vinson. Hello and good evening for everyone. Without further ado, let's start off with my first top point for today, which is stamp duty on property, investment and joint purchases. In Malaysia, when you bought or invest a property alone or with others, you have to pay for a stamp duty, which is a tax on the paperwork involved in the transaction. The amount also depends on the factor like a property value or the type of a deal. For joint purchases, each person pays for their own share of the stamp duty. It is important to know these rules to follow the law and plan your finance when dealing with the real estate. Okay, for the first time exemption, it is a hit or miss. In other words, it's the first exemption for stamp duty that is not transferable, meaning that the individuals cannot retain for this benefit for their own second property purchase. Next, let's move on to our second top point, which is we will talk about the stamp duty exemption and changes in 2024. The stamp duty landscape for 2024 attention is significant exemption aimed for facilitating the property ownership. As part of the government initiative to support the home buyers, particularly the first-time purchaser, stamp duty exemption has been introduced to eligible individuals seeking to invest in residential properties. This exemption serves as a financial incentive, promoting accessibility to home ownership and potentially easing the burden of aspiring property owners in the real estate market for the year of 2024. As you can see in the next slide, we will look at the stamp duty exemption that are still applicable for today. This stamp duty exemption, PUA 53, is for the sale and purchase agreement where the stamp duty is exempted on the transfer, whereas for the PUA 54 is the stamp duty exemption on the loan. The exemption criteria, as you can see in the slide, is applicable for residential property where it does not include the sofa and the service apartment, where the market value of the property must be not more than 500,000. And the potential buyer will be a Malaysian citizen who has never acquired any residential property. The sale and purchase agreement also need to be executed on or after the 1st of January 2021 and not later by 31st December 2025. This exemption is applicable for subject property and also both under the developer project. Okay, the next stamp duty exemption we will be looking at is regarding the property transfer for on the ground of love and affection. This stamp duty exemption has been introduced by the government during the last year budget 2023. Where this stamp duty exemption is to initiate that all instrument of transfer on the property on the ground of love and affection between parents and children or grandparents and grandchildren be given 100% stamp duty exemption on the first 1 million of the property value. Any remaining balance will be subjected to the stamp duty at an ad valorem rate, but with a 50% remission on the duty imposed. On the next slide, you can see that this exemption is particularly applicable for the transfer among spouses, which is husband to wife and vice versa. This stamp duty exemption allows full 100% exemption on any transfer inter vivos, which is a transfer during a lifetime between a husband and wife, regardless of the property value. This order comes into force on 8th of September 2007. Moving on to the next slide, this particular stamp duty exemption and remission is basically for the stamp duty exemption purchase of the first residential homes under the Home Ownership Program 2022 and /2023. Following the proposal in the National Budget 2023, the PUA 176 and 177 is presented by the government on 9 of June 2023 to legislate the stamp duty exemption for the first home buyers and were deemed to have come into effect 1st June 2022. This exemption for PUA 176 is an exemption of the stamp duty on any loan agreement to finance the purchase of a residential property through the Malaysian Home Ownership Initiative, IMILIKI, under the Home Ownership Program 2022/2023, which the value of the property will be not more than 500 ringgit, executed between the individual in the sale and purchase agreement and the person and the other parties will be such as a licensed bank under the Financial Services Act. Whereas for the PUA 177, that is a stamp duty exemption on all the instruments of transfer for the purchase of the residential property through IMILIKI for the value of the loan which is not more than 500 ringgit executed by the individual. For the other two stamp duty remission, PUA 179 and PUA 180, basically it's the stamp remission for IMILIKI also, but the difference between these two stamp duty remission is that the value of the property will be between 500 million to 1 million ringgit. Whereas for the 180, PUA 180 is the minister will remit 75% of the stamp duty chargeable on any instrument of transfer executed by an individual to purchase a residential property valued between 501 to 1 million. That is all based on the market value. This exemption and remission will only apply to sale and purchase agreement which will be executed latest by 31st December 2023 and stamped latest by 31st January 2024. On the next slide, we will look at the stamp duty changes under the budget 2024. A flat rate of 4% of stamp duty on the Memorandum of Transfer MOT will be implemented for the non-citizen and foreign-owned companies with the exemption of permanent residents. This applies to instrument of transfer executed from 1st January 2024. This move will help and control land or property prices for locals. Prior to this amendment, transfer of property in favor of the foreigner would be subject to the same stamp duty rates for normal citizen. Okay, for example, if the property purchase is 1 million, the difference of the stamp duty will be 16,000 compared to the normal rate, as explained by my colleague Vinson earlier. Okay, to some, this might have a small impact. Foreigners usually purchase property in the Klang Valley or Penang, where the threshold of 1 million and above is required for them to purchase a property in Malaysia. Moving on, the stamp duty changes is particularly for the transfer of the eligible beneficiary re-announcement. In the 2024 budget, introduced a stamp duty of 10 ringgit on the property transferred where eligible beneficiary renounce their right to another eligible beneficiary as per Will or Distribution Act 1958. A stamp duty of 10 ringgit is also imposed on the conveyance, assign and transfer of property by way of release or renunciation of by the beneficiary of the deceased estate or another beneficiary entitled under the same estate. Prior to this amendment, a transfer of the property under such relinquish would be subject to the ad valorem stamp duty of the market value of the property. Lastly is on the stamp duty on the conventional loan agreement and Sharia compliance financing in a foreign currency. Currently, agreement in the foreign currency or financing made according to the Sharia in currencies other than the Ringgit Malaysia are subject to the rate of 5 ringgit for every 1,000 of loan amount and subject to a maximum stamp duty of 2,000 ringgit. It is proposed that this maximum limit of 2,000 ringgit is to be abolished. The effective date of this instrument of loan is to be executed from 1st January of 2024. I think that is all on my part now, so I will pass the floor to our moderator, Alyssa, to continue with the talk.
Thank you, Azila and Vincent, for your insights. It was very knowledgeable. So let's look at the questions. Everybody, you can still ask some questions in the Q&A box down below while we are answering these questions. Okay, the first question from Ms. Catherine Lee. The property gifted by the parent to the child or the grandchild, does the transfer attract stamp duty? And also, does any property sold by the parent to the child or grandchild attract stamp duty as well?
Thank you very much, Alyssa, and thank you, Catherine, for the question. So to answer your query, pursuant to the recent POA 178/2023, which my colleague just now, Azila, has already shared, so all transfers of property via voluntary gift between parents, children, and grandparents and grandchildren are all exempt from stamp duty, but only on the first 1 million of the value of the property. So any amount in excess of the first 1 million of the value of the property is still subject to stamp duty, but at a discount of 50%, which means instead of the usual 4% payable on the transfer beyond 1 million, the chargeable stamp duty is only 2% for any amount in excess of 1 million for transfers of property via voluntary gift, provided that the instrument is signed after 1st April 2023 and then the recipient is a Malaysian. So the second part of the question, so for property sold by parents to children or grandchildren, does it attract stamp duty? The answer is yes. So all transfers of property via sale and purchase agreement, regardless of who is the seller and who is the vendor, it is subject to stamp duty as per the rate explained in our table earlier. But of course, as explained by the second speaker, my colleague Azila just now, if the purchaser children or the purchaser parent happens to be the first-time purchaser, they can apply for a stamp duty exemption based on the applicable stamp duty policies.
Okay, thank you, Vincent, for answering that question. Our second question is also from Ms. Catherine Lee, who asked, should the stamp duty be paid by the tenant or the house owner?
Okay, thank you for the question, Ms. Catherine. Okay, for the stamp duty on the tenancy, there is no law governing on which parties should pay for the stamp duty. Arrangement can be made, therefore, among the parties, i.e. the landlord and the tenant. It can be made payable wholly by the tenant, or it can be made wholly payable by the landlord. Or other parties can bear the stamp duty portion in equal share. However, in most tenancy agreement, the one that will be bear for the stamp duty of the tenancy will be the tenant.
I see. Okay, thank you for answering that, Azila. Our next question is from Sydney. Under the budget 2023, the 4% stamp duty rate commenced on 1st of January 2024 for foreigner purchase or acquired property. Any idea on how the rate can be calculated?
Thank you, Alyssa, for reading the question, and thank you, Sydney, for the question as well. So this means that the stamp duty for foreigner purchases will be calculated based on a flat 4% of the value of the property or the consideration of the property. So say, for example, if the property is valued at 1 million, the stamp duty payable by a normal Malaysian citizen would be 24,000 based on the formula that we shared just now. But in the case of foreigners, under the recent change to the stamp duty, they will have to pay 40,000 instead of 24,000 for a property value at 1 million. This means that he will be essentially paying 16,000 Malaysian ringgit in extra.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Sydney. Our next question is from Ms. Catherine Lee as well. What are the legal fees for an MOT or a memorandum of transfer?
Okay, thanks again for your interest in this, Ms. Catherine. Okay, for the professional legal fees for the memorandum of transfer, that one will be based on the solicitor remuneration order 2023, where there is scales of the payment for the legal fees. If, let's say, the legal fees will be calculated on the value of the property. So for the first 500,000, our legal fees will be calculated by times 1.25%, which is if the property value or the memorandum of transfer consideration is 500,000, our legal fees times by 1.25% will be 6,250. And then let's say the MOT consideration is 1 million. The first 500,000 will be times by 1.25%, and the next remaining balance will be next 7.5 million will be times by 1%. In this case, the remaining balance of 500,000 will be times by 1%, which is 5,000. So for our legal fees, 6250 plus 5,000, that will be our legal fees. And any other amount of consideration which is beyond 8 million will be negotiable maximum by 1%. If let's say the MOT consideration is 10 million, then the other remaining balance of 2 million will be calculated by times 1%, which maximum is 1%, or it can be lower, but the maximum amount for the remaining balance of 2 million will be 1%. Hope the explanation suffices.
Okay, thank you, Azila, for answering the question. Our next question is, what is the latest calculation of stamp duty on loans and Sharia compliant financing agreements now, after the stamp duty cap of 2,000 ringgit has been removed?
Thanks again, Alyssa, for reading the question, and thank you to our anonymous attendee for giving us this question. So as with conventional loan agreement, so ever since the cap on stamp duty for loans and Sharia compliant financing agreement has been removed, that means there's no cap on the stamp duty for these two financing agreements, and therefore the stamp duty payable for these agreements will be the same as conventional loan agreements. So that means you take the loan amount and multiply by 0.5%, and that's where you get your payable stamp duty amount. I hope this answers your question. Thank you.
Okay, our next question is from an anonymous attendee as well. Do we round up the stamp duty for MOT to the nearest ringgit or to the nearest 10 ringgit, if the calculation shows cents, for example, 9,981.90 cents, for example.
Thank you to Alyssa and thank you to our anonymous attendee for this question. So this will be a pretty straightforward one. So if we were to look at Stamp Act 1949, it says that stamp duty is for every 100 ringgit or fractional part of 100 ringgit. So that means you need to round up to the nearest round up. So not just merely rounding off, but round up to the nearest 100. And then only you multiply using the rate or formula that we provided in our slides earlier. So that means the stamp duty payable of all transfer agreements will never end up with cents. It will always end up with a whole number. I hope that explains. Thank you.
Our next question is also from an anonymous attendee. In a situation where there are two purchasers or owners of a property, where one is a local and one is a foreigner that wants to do an execution of transfer, in such a situation, what rate of the stamp duty of the MOT is applicable to this transaction? Is it a flat rate for the foreigner as well?
Thank you for the question. For this type of joint purchases for the property, the stamp duty for this joint purchase normally will be subject to the Inland Revenue Board approval. But for this one, the stamp duty for the local half share will be based on the normal rate portion, which is, as explained by my colleague Vinson earlier, the first 500,000 will be 1%, next 400,000, 2%, the next 500,000, 3%. And then for the foreigner portion, there will be a 4% flat rate on the foreigner portion of the consideration alone. But this one also is subjected to the current market value, because for foreigner, especially in Klang Valley, the threshold for them to purchase a property is up to 1 million. So depending on the current market value, if let's say if the property purchase is on the portion of the foreigner side alone, need to be more than 1 million in order for the foreigner to be eligible for this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Azila, for answering our question. Our next question is, are there any stamp duty on power of attorney instruments prepared in conjunction with a particular transfer?
Thank you, Alyssa, and thank you, Catherine, for your question. So I will also read out to the audience for clarity purposes, because Catherine followed up with a clarification. So she said that, say, for example, property transfer to A, and there is a power of attorney from A in favor of B for the transfer. So is there stamp duty on the power of attorney if the MOT to A is already exempted? So the answer to Catherine's question is yes. So power of attorneys must still be stamped, but there will only be a net flat stamp duty, flat fixed stamp duty of 10 ringgit for each piece of power of attorney. So that should be very affordable for the entire transaction. Thank you.
Our next question is, okay, in regards to the transfer of share in property from one beneficiary to another by way of a denouncing of right under a devolution from a deceased parent under the Small Estates Distribution Act, is such transfer applicable to 100% of the value of the share? And the person who asked this question also provided some context whether this exemption is to 100% of the share value.
Thank you, Dr. Stanley Isaacs, for the question, and thanks, Alyssa, again. So if we were to look at our slides just now, so pursuant to Malaysian Budget 2024 and Finance Number 2 Act 2023, which was just recently gazetted and which recently came into effect, a flat stamp duty of 10 ringgit is imposed on conveyances or transfers of property by way of renunciation of a beneficiary's right in favor of another beneficiary entitled under the same estate. And therefore, the stamp duty payable for this transfer where a beneficiary decides to renounce his right would be a flat 10 ringgit stamp duty on his transfer. I hope that answers your question, Dr. Stanley.
Okay, we have one from Muhammad Hassan. Muhammad Hassan asks, is the stamp duty applicable for a consultancy agreement? And if yes, how do we calculate that?
Thanks for the question, Muhammad Hassan. Unfortunately, for today's talk is confined for the stamp duty on the property transaction. If there is such a stamp duty applicable for the consultancy agreement, we'll be much happy to provide you with the calculation thereafter once we have a look at the stamp duty for the consultancy agreement for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Azila. And further to Azila's explanation just now, so we will be happy to provide you a guidance or rather a free complimentary consultation after the end of this talk. So you may go to our official website at www.mawenkwai to just drop us a message and we will be happy to assist you.
Thank you, Azila and Vinson, for answering the questions just now. Okay, before we conclude, I do have a few announcements to make. First, please join us again soon for our upcoming talk on the 24th of January, 2024 on a Wednesday or so. Contract in Everyday Life, How They Shape Your World by two of our senior associates, Kirbashini Chandran and also Edwin Raj. And secondly, please fill in our feedback form and tell us what you thought of our talk. The link to the form will be posted in the chat soon. And thirdly, do follow and like our social media accounts. And fourthly, if you would like to speak to our lawyers, we do offer, like Vincent said earlier, a complimentary 30-minute consultation, either over the telephone or over video conference. Please fill in the form on our website. You can also scan the QR code given here for any further inquiries that you have further to this talk. So to our guests, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have found today's session informative and also useful. Thank you, everybody, and see you at our next talk.